This is the week of April 13th through the 17th. We're looking at slides 11 through 20, and we are looking at this one in particular. This is called The Jungle. So, welcome to the jungle. So, this is by the artist Wilfredo Lam. This is done in 1943, and it's on gouache on paper mounted on canvas. Okay. This is at the Museum of Modern Art, and this is roughly the size of an 8 foot by 8 foot square. So this is pretty large. You can classify Lam under the surrealism. He kind of falls under another type of a category for a painting, but we'll get into that later on. So just to kind of start off who Wilfredo Lam is, let's just start off with some background information. He's Afro-Cuban. He is the best renowned painter from Cuba, and this is his best known work right here to the left. Basically just starting off kind of like in the beginning, in the 1930s, he encountered Matisse and Picasso when he was in Europe for a period of time. He lived in Spain and he also lived in Paris. In the 1940s, he returned to Cuba to focus on the flamboyant art and nature and African religions. Okay. And then in 1945, he travels to Haiti with Andre Breton, which we've mentioned him before with Murat Oppenheim, and he's basically one of the surrealist leaders, influenced by voodoo and rituals. And then in 1982, Lam passes away. So he's influenced by Cuba's social economic status, surrealism in Europe, and the Afro Caribbean culture, dominated by the U.S. intervention of unstable politics. So that's what we're going to kind of get into discussing. A little bit about his race. It's a mixed race. He's part Cuban. His mother was African, and had been a slave in Cuba who had worked in the sugarcane fields, referred to here, both by African mask inspired faces and setting in sugarcane. While his father was Chinese, he uses the visual language of surrealism to address economic disparity among Cubans to explore hybrid Afro-Cuban religion, and it's classified under this name called Santeria, and it's spelled Santeria. And again, that's where he's addressing the um, hybrid of Afro-Cuban religion. So that's what that's going to stand for. So a little bit about what we see going on. Like I said, this is an 8 by 8 size um, canvas that we see here. So this is very large. We notice that the color palette, let's just start off with the color. We see it's being dominantly used with blue, green colors. And then they also mention a little bit of like some crimson, so some of like that red that we see, that rusted color, and some gold. So just little hints of gold here and there. And basically, what we can see is we see a little bit, if we're talking about balance, I would say we see a little bit maybe more of like some asymmetrical balance if we were to chop this down the center, where we would see it being a little bit more heavy on top than on the bottom. So the top is more dense and the bottom is left a little bit more open. And what we actually see being depicted here is sugarcane. But how does sugarcane apply to the jungle? How is that? So, what this basically alludes to is the harsh reality of the laboring of the Cubans. Beginning of time, depiction of mythical forces. So, we actually see some uh, interesting characters, if I can just say that, being depicted here, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. They resemble basically if you've ever been in a fun house or some sort of a carnival where you go up to those mirrors that are like have like curves in them and that are wavy, and when you stand in front of it, it makes you look all disproportioned. So that's kind of what he's alluding to, this kind of resembling. So we see how the figures are constructed basically in the form of crescent faces. You can kind of see that here, so almost like moon faces. And those are kind of, I'm thinking, the ones where we're seeing like those African masks being attributed to. And then, excuse me, we're also seeing rounded back sides. So again, looking at the backs of these particular figures, think they're kind of alluding to like these main four figures right here. And then willowy arms. You can kind of see how their arms are kind of just dangling. They're again, this is disproportionate, not supposed to look realistic at all. And then flat hands and feet. And that, you can kind of see that clearly with how some of these are depicted. Okay, and let's see. It's very tight. Not a lot of like uh, landscape going on. We don't see, this is an important painting in the 20th century. It's an unorthodox landscape, no horizon line. That's what I was trying to get to. We see no sky. We see a faint sense of ground. It's very directionless in snapshot. And basically, again, this is supposed to show a depiction of a sugarcane. Would not have, and obviously it would, again, not grow in a jungle landscape, but show because the big industry in Cuba is important to Cuban life. And these, let's continue on. These, okay, I mentioned that already. So basically, the four grotesque figures that we kind of see that we can maybe kind of like somewhat identify, maybe right here, right here, right here, and right here. Basically, they're all wearing these terrifying masks like heads. Half are engulfed by the vegetation of the tropical rainforest, tall stalks of sugarcane and bamboo, so you can kind of see both being depicted here. The artist is haphazardly constructs the figures from a collection of distinct forms. Again, we were talking about that earlier. Shifting of figures comes from Lamb's interest in the Santeria, the Afro-Cuban religion that mixes Catholicism with African customs. And he originally he did learn how to paint in the academic style, but he disliked it and preferred to paint outdoors. So one thing to note with this being related to surrealism, to kind of tie that back into play real quick, he's influenced by Freud, whose methods try to access the unconsciousness. So that's where we get into the topic of surrealism. It aims to release the unconscious mind, which is suppressed by the rational in order to achieve another reality. So please put that down for your vocab word for surrealism, and I'll repeat that. It aims to release the unconsciousness mind, which is suppressed by the rational in order to achieve another reality. Here we see otherworldly atmosphere emerge from the constant shifting taking place. Among the figures, they are once, this is where I'm getting to with how they're being depicted as human, animal, organic, and mythic. Okay, just looking over my notes, making sure I didn't forget anything. And okay, so last thing to kind of just mention, at this time, figures are highly sexualized, and so lots of prostitution is going on in Havana and the sugarcane wealth of Cuba because of the Afro-Cubans. This is kind of also to allude how people of this time thought Cuba was just almost like a destination, just kind of a beach weekend hangout, and they're not really getting depicted the reality of what's really going on in the country of Cuba and what the majority of the people are slaves and what they are actually working in are the sugarcane fields that support for the U.S. So that's basically going to wrap us up for The Jungle by Wilfredo Lam. This is Mrs. Howard signing out.